Keanu Reeves had always loved quiet places that didn't care about fame. Small diners, cozy cafes, local restaurants tucked away from the noise of flashing cameras and gossip columns. It made him feel like an ordinary man again, even if only for a moment. So when he found himself in Chicago for a few days, he decided to step into a small, old restaurant that looked like it hadn't changed its menu in 20 years. It was drizzling that evening. The city lights blurred in the wet pavement as Keanu pulled the collar of his jacket tighter around his neck. He pushed open the restaurant door and stepped inside. Warmth and the smell of fresh bread wrapped around him like a blanket. The place wasn't fancy checkered tablecloths, cracked tiles, and a big chalkboard menu above the counter, but it felt real. The kind of place where stories settled into the walls like old smoke. Keanu walked up to the counter, his eyes scanning the room. Families sat close together, workers fresh off their shifts. A few people alone with steaming mugs of coffee. He liked that no one looked up at him like he was something special to them. He was just another tired soul looking for a meal. "Hi there," he said to the young waitress behind the counter. She smiled shyly, probably guessing who he was but saying nothing. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Just a bowl of your soup and some bread," he said, "and coffee if you have it." The girl scribbled his order and pointed him toward a booth in the corner. Keanu settled in. Shrugging off his wet jacket, he watched the rain slide down the windows. He thought about the script pages in his bag, the meeting he'd skipped because he needed a break from business talk and cold suits. He just wanted to feel like himself tonight. But peace doesn't always last. Just as the waitress brought his soup, a loud voice cut through the quiet hum of the restaurant. "What's he doing here?" Keanu looked up. A man in a wrinkled shirt and stained apron stood near the counter, glaring at him with eyes that carried years of hard nights and heavier secrets. The waitress froze, the bowl of soup trembling in her hands. "Mr. Mackey," she started, but the man, clearly the manager, waved her off. Keanu spoke up, his voice calm. "I'm sorry. Is there a problem, Mr.?" Mackey stepped closer, anger flashing like a match struck too fast. "Yeah, there's a problem. I don't need your kind in here." Keanu blinked, trying to keep his confusion from turning to frustration. "My kind? Rich celebrities who think they can waltz in and pretend they're just like us." Mackey spat. "You come here for show, take your photos, act humble. Then you leave with your fancy car and your fancy life while the rest of us keep scraping." Silence fell over the tables. People stopped chewing. Forks paused midair. The young waitress looked like she might cry. Keanu felt heat rise in his chest, but he kept his tone even. "I'm not here for photos. I just wanted a meal." "Then go get one somewhere else," Mackey snapped. "We don't want your pity money." Keanu stood, his hands open at his sides. He could have argued. He could have thrown his fame in. The man's face, called a manager, made a scene like any other celebrity might have. But that wasn't him. Instead, he looked at the waitress, her eyes wide with silent apologies. "It's okay," Keanu said gently. "Thank you for the soup." He picked up his jacket, still damp from the rain. As he stepped toward the door, he felt every pair of eyes following him. But what hurt more than the stares was the way the manager's shoulders shook. Anger hiding something else, something Keanu recognized all too well. Desperation, fear. A man drowning while everyone watched. Keanu stepped out into the rainy street, the door shutting behind him with a thud that echoed in his chest. The cold air hit him hard, but he didn't move at first. He stood under the awning, the drizzle soaking the edges of his sleeves. He could have left then, found another restaurant, another quiet place that would welcome him for his money and his smile. But something in his gut told him to stay. He looked back through the window. The manager barked orders at the waitress, but his hands trembled. As he cleaned the counter, Keanu took a deep breath. Maybe this was more than just a ruined meal. Maybe this was a door cracked open for a reason. Maybe there was something here that needed more than soup to fix. With rain dripping from his hair, he turned and walked down the street, his mind already spinning. He didn't know how yet, but he knew he wouldn't let that man drown alone. Not tonight. Not ever. The rain fell heavier as Keanu walked away from the small restaurant, his boots splashing through shallow puddles that reflected neon signs and passing headlights. Each step felt heavy, not because of the cold but because of the way. The manager's eyes had burned with something deeper than anger. Keanu had seen it before in people life had worn down to the bone, fear wrapped in bitterness. A heart too tired to hope anymore. He reached the end of the block and ducked under a narrow awning outside a closed bookstore. He leaned against the glass, the drizzle drumming on the metal above him. He could have gone back to his hotel, ordered room service, forgotten the whole thing. But as he stood there, he kept seeing the young waitress's eyes, how they darted from him to the manager, how she wanted to say something but was too afraid. Keanu knew he couldn't just walk away. It wasn't in him to ignore that kind of pain, not when he'd once been the lonely soul in the corner. Desperate for someone to see him beyond the mask, he waited until the rain eased a little, then slipped back down the block. The restaurant windows glowed soft yellow against the night. He stayed across the street, under the shadows of a flickering street lamp. Through the glass, he could see the waitress wiping down tables, while the manager paced behind the counter, rubbing the back of his neck with a trembling hand. Keanu watched until the last customers left. The waitress locked the door behind them, flipped the open sign to closed, and began stacking chairs on tables. The manager disappeared into the kitchen. After a moment, Keanu crossed the street and tapped gently on the glass. The girl jumped, dropping a fork that clattered on the tile floor. She squinted through the window, surprise washing over her face when she recognized him. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure the manager wasn't watching, then hurried to the door and cracked it open just enough for her face to peek out. "Mr. Reeves," she whispered. "Why are you back? Please, you'll just make him more angry." Keanu kept his voice low, gentle. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I wanted to understand. What's going on here?" Her eyes darted to the kitchen again. "You should go. He'll come out any minute." "What's your name?" Keanu asked. "Emma," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma," he repeated softly, like he was anchoring the word in his mind. "Emma, I saw how scared you looked earlier. You don't have to be afraid of me." Her shoulders dropped a fraction, though the fear didn't leave her eyes. "It's not you I'm afraid of," she said. "It's this place, it's him." Keanu glanced past her to the empty dining room, the lights casting long shadows across the floor. "Emma, I don't want to hurt your job, but that man, your manager, there's more to his anger, isn't there?" She hesitated, fingers tapping nervously against the doorframe. "He's not a bad man," she said quickly, like she was protecting him and herself at the same time. "He's just tired. His wife left last year. He's trying to keep this place open. But business is bad. The bills keep piling up. The landlord is threatening to sell the building." Keanu listened, piecing it together in his mind. It made sense: the cracks in the walls, the old equipment, the stress in the manager's voice. He had let anger grow because the weight was too much to hold alone. "Emma," Keanu said gently, "what if I could help?" Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No, please. He'd hate that. He'd think you're pitying him. He hates pity." Keanu thought about that. He knew she was right. Some men carried pride like a shield, even when it cut deeper than any blade. He couldn't walk in with money like a savior. He needed to show that he wasn't just there to fix things and disappear. "Okay," Keanu said softly, "but I want you to promise me something." "What?" she asked. "If things get worse, if you ever feel unsafe, or if you need help, you call me. Here." He pulled a small card from his wallet, scribbling his private number on the back with a pen he found at the hostess stand. "This is just for you. You don't have to tell him. You don't have to tell anyone. Just promise me." Emma took the card like it was made of glass. Her eyes glistened under the dim entry light. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. Keanu looked through the window at the kitchen door, where he could see the manager's shadow moving behind the stained curtain. "Because no one should feel alone when they're drowning," he said simply. "I've been there." Emma nodded, pressing the card to her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu gave her a small smile. "Call me Keanu." Before he turned to go, she caught his sleeve. "Please don't do anything tonight. Let him cool off." "Please." Keanu nodded. "I promise." He stepped back into the night, the rain finally easing into a soft drizzle. He knew this wasn't over. Something in his gut told him that restaurant and the people inside it were part of a story that needed more than just a meal and an apology to fix. Don, as he walked away, he whispered to himself, "You don't just leave people behind, not when you can help them." Stand in the warm glow of that old diner window, a fragile hope flickered, small, but enough to keep the darkness from swallowing it whole. Keanu didn't sleep much that night. He sat by the window of his small hotel room, the rain tapping out a slow, steady rhythm against the glass. Sam, his old dog, lay curled at his feet, breathing softly. Keanu absent-mindedly scratched behind Sam's ears as his mind replayed every moment at that little Chicago restaurant. Emma's frightened eyes, the manager's bitter anger, the way the place felt like it was crumbling under the weight of too many hard years. By dawn, Keanu knew he couldn't just let it go. He got dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, worn jeans, an old t-shirt, and a jacket that smelled faintly of rain. He slipped downstairs, grabbed 2 coffees and a bag of fresh pastries from the corner bakery, and walked back through the early morning streets while the city was still half asleep. When he reached the restaurant, the open sign was flipped back, but the place looked just as empty as it had the night before. Through the window, he saw the manager, Mr. Mackey, sitting alone at a booth near the window. His head rested in his hands, shoulders hunched, the weight of the world pressing down on his back. Keanu stood across the street for a moment, watching. Part of him wanted to turn around. What if he made things worse? What if Mackey's pride snapped again and closed off any chance of help? But then he thought of Emma and how she clutched that small card like it was a lifeline. He couldn't be another person who promised to care and then disappeared when things got messy. He crossed the street, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled softly, echoing in the quiet. Mackey looked up, his eyes bloodshot and full of suspicion. "You again," Mackey muttered. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept either. "Didn't you get the message last night? You're not welcome here." Keanu held up the bag and the coffees. "Mind if I sit?" Mackey barked out a dry laugh that didn't sound like laughter at all. "What's this, huh? You here to buy me breakfast now? More pity?" Keanu set the bag on the table and slid 1 coffee toward the older man. He didn't sit yet. Instead, he looked Mackey straight in the eyes. "This isn't pity, it's breakfast. I figured you probably didn't eat yet." Mackey stared at the coffee for a long moment, then snatched it up with a frustrated grunt. He took a sip, scowling at the warmth. "I don't want your charity." "Good," Keanu said, finally sliding into the booth across from him. "Because I'm not giving you charity. I'm offering you a chance to talk." Mackey slammed the coffee down so hard it splashed onto the table. "Talk about what, huh? How you think you're better than me? You think you can fix everything with your Hollywood money?" Keanu shook his head. "If I thought money fixed everything, I wouldn't be here. I'd be in some fancy place that treats me like I'm special. But I'm here because last night I saw something I couldn't ignore." Mackey rubbed a hand over his tired face. His shoulders trembled, though his voice tried to stay sharp. "What'd you see, huh? Some washed-up cook who can't keep his life together." Keanu leaned forward, lowering his voice so that the truth in it couldn't be ignored. "I saw a man who's drowning. I've been that man." Silence wrapped around them, thick and heavy. For a moment, Keanu thought Mackey might throw him out again, but instead, the older man sagged back in his seat, his eyes losing the fight they'd carried for so long. "You don't know me," Mackey said, his voice cracking. "You don't know what it's like to wake up every day, wondering if this place will still be yours by sunset, to watch your wife walk out because she can't stand to see you fail, to look at your staff, Emma, my last waitress, and know you're dragging them down with you." Keanu's chest tightened. "You're right. I don't know your life, but I know what it feels like to be alone with the weight, to be so sure you have to carry it by yourself or else you'll look weak." Mackey let out a sharp breath, staring at his hands like they were someone else's. "You know what this place used to be? Packed every night. Families, kids, old couples who'd been coming here since my dad ran it. I inherited this mess and thought I could keep it alive. But you can't cook hope into soup when people stop showing up." Keanu reached into the bag and pulled out a warm pastry, pushing it toward Mackey. "What if you didn't have to do it alone?" Mackie shot him a hard look. What's that supposed to mean? You're gonna swoop in. Buy the place, slap your name on it like a trophy. Keanu's voice stayed calm, steady as a heartbeat. No, I'm not buying anything. But maybe I can help you remind people why they love this place in the first place. Maybe they just need to see it's still alive, still worth fighting for. Mackie's eyes narrowed. And why would you do that? Keanu shrugged, a small, sad smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Because you matter. Because Emma matters. Because this place matters. And because I know what it feels like when someone believes in you. Even when you don't believe in yourself. Mackie rubbed a hand over his eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to come. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know where to start. Keanu leaned back, his mind already ticking through ideas. We start small. I know some people, local food bloggers, folks who love real stories. We tell them the truth about this place. We don't hide the cracks, we show the heart. You do the cooking, I'll do the talking. Mackie looked down at the coffee, his fingers tapping the side of the paper cup. And if it doesn't work, Keanu's voice was a whisper, but it carried more promise than any shouted vow. Then we keep trying, together. For the first time, the older man let out a small, tired laugh that sounded real. You're a stubborn bastard. You know that? Keanu grinned. I've heard. Outside the window, the rain finally stopped. The clouds broke just enough for a pale ray of morning sun to slip through, landing right on their table like a quiet promise that some storms don't last forever. Keanu took a sip of his own coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him like hope. Let's fix this, he said. Mackie nodded. A man who had spent years drowning, finally reaching for the lifeline he never thought he deserved. The next few days felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of old regrets and fragile hopes. Keanu stayed in Chicago, canceling the rest of his meetings, telling his agent he needed a few more days for something important. Every morning, he showed up at the little restaurant before the sun even rose. He'd bring pastries, fresh coffee, and a quiet promise to Mackie that they would do this together. Emma started to smile more when Keanu walked in. She still looked nervous when Mackie was near, but she seemed lighter, like she was beginning to believe they weren't alone anymore. She watched Keanu sweep the floor, scrub down tables, and run errands without any fuss, like he really was just another tired worker. In an old neighborhood diner. One morning, Keanu asked her, what was this place like before it got so quiet? Emma's eyes lit up. Busy. You couldn't find an empty seat on Saturday nights. People lined up outside for Mackie's meatloaf and his wife's pies. Her voice dipped when she added, it changed after she left. Mackie just stopped trying. Keanu looked across the room where Mackie stood behind the counter, staring at the same cracked tile like it held a secret. Maybe it's time we help him start again, Keanu said. That afternoon, Keanu called a friend, an old food blogger who loved small, honest places more than fancy restaurants with celebrity chefs. When she heard what he wanted, she laughed. Keanu, you know your name alone will fill that place, right? No, Keanu said. It's not about me, it's about Mackie. I want people to come because they believe in him, not because they want a selfie with me. So the blogger came. She sat in the corner, tasted Mackie's meatloaf and homemade soup. She wrote notes, snapped photos of the faded checkered tablecloths and the stories carved into the walls. She didn't mention Keanu once, just Mackie's recipes, Emma's kindness, the warmth of the place that made it feel like home if you let it. The blog post went live 2 days later. It was called A Meal Worth Saving. Within hours, people shared it. Locals remembered birthday dinners, wedding anniversaries, and first dates spent in those rickety booths. By evening, the phone started ringing. Mackie stared at it like it might bite him. They want reservations, Emma said, her eyes wide. We don't even take reservations. Keanu grinned. Guess you do now. The next night, the door kept swinging open. Old regulars came back, brushing snow from their coats, laughing when they saw the same cracked tiles they remembered. Families filled the booths. Kids pressed their noses to the glass display where pies sat waiting under dusty covers. Mackie stood frozen behind the counter until Keanu nudged him. Go cook, he said. They didn't come for me, they came for you. Mackie's hands trembled at first as he ladled soup into bowls, flipped burgers, and called orders back to Emma. But as the night went on, something changed. His shoulders straightened. His eyes cleared. He moved like a man who remembered who he used to be, a man who fed people. Not just because they were hungry, but because he believed they deserved to feel at home, even for an hour. Keanu washed dishes in the back, sleeves rolled up, water splashing onto his shirt. He didn't care. He laughed when Emma poked her head in and said, "They're asking for you. They want photos." Keanu shook his head, wiping his hands on an old towel. "Tell them it's not about me. Tell them to thank Mackie." Emma smiled, her voice warm. "You're a good man, Keanu. Just trying to do the right thing," he said. When the rush was finally over, the restaurant was quiet again, but not empty. Mackie sat in a booth, counting the cash in the old wooden register. His hands were still greasy from the kitchen, but he looked like a man who could breathe again. Keanu sat across from him, sipping coffee. Sam curled at his feet, dozing. "Why are you still here?" Mackie asked, not accusing, just curious. You could be anywhere in the world. Keanu thought about that. He looked around the little diner, at the cracked tiles, the battered booths, the handwritten signs taped to the walls. He thought about all the places in his life where he'd felt like a stranger, where people looked at him but never really saw him. "Because this place matters," Keanu said quietly. "And so do you. We forget that sometimes, how much people need places like this, and people like you." Mackie's eyes glistened. "I treated you like trash. I threw you out." Keanu smiled. "Yeah, but sometimes people yell when they're scared. Sometimes they push you away because they think they have nothing left to give." Mackie leaned back in the booth, a quiet laugh escaping his lips. "Emma wants to paint the walls. She says the place should feel new again." Keanu raised his cup. "Then you let her. Maybe that's how you start over. One coat of paint, one good night, one meal at a time." They sat there long after the last light flickered out on the street. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. For the first time in years, Mackie didn't look like a man drowning. He looked like a man learning to swim again. Keanu patted Sam's head. "Come on, buddy, let's get some sleep. Tomorrow's another busy day." As he stepped out into the cold, he glanced back through the fogged window. Inside, Mackie sat alone in his booth, but not lonely anymore. Hope, fragile but real, glowed around him like a promise that the past didn't always have to win. Word spread fast after that first busy night. The tiny restaurant that had almost slipped into darkness was alive again. And this time it didn't feel like a quick spark about to burn out. Every day, more people came, old regulars with stories about the owner's father, new faces curious to see what made this little place special. But they didn't come to see Keanu. That was exactly how he wanted it. Keanu spent every morning there, not as a celebrity but as a helper, a friend. He mopped floors before the sun rose, washed dishes when the sink piled up, even ran deliveries. When Emma couldn't keep up with the takeout orders, when people did recognize him, he smiled and said, "It's not about me. Order the meatloaf. Tell your friends, come back next week." Emma blossomed in the warmth of it all. Her shy smile turned into laughter that floated through the kitchen. Whenever Mackie cracked an old joke, she started adding small touches: fresh flowers on the tables, a chalkboard with new specials. She painted one wall a soft yellow that made the light feel warmer, like sunshine had found its way inside. Mackie, meanwhile, was a man transformed. He still barked orders sometimes, but his anger was softer now, more like an old habit he was learning to break. The heavy lines on his face began to ease. He even smiled, really smiled, when customers told him how good his food still was. He told them about his father's recipes, about how he'd learned to cook standing on a stool next to his dad's old stove. And for the first time in years, he didn't talk about closing the doors. One night, after a long rush, the last customers trickled out into the cold Chicago streets. The chairs were up on the tables, the floor smelled faintly of soap, and the coffee pot gurgled its last tired drip. Keanu, Mackie, and Emma sat together in a corner booth. Sam curled up under the table, snoring gently. Emma reached into her apron and pulled out the card Keanu had given her that first rainy night. It was soft at the edges, like she'd held it 1,000 times. She placed it on the table and pushed it toward him. "I don't need this anymore," she said, her voice steady but her eyes shining. "You kept your promise." Keanu picked up the card, tracing the faded ink with his thumb. He tucked it into his pocket and looked at her with a proud smile. "No one should ever feel alone." "Emma, you're not alone. Not here." Mackie cleared his throat, pretending he wasn't wiping at the corner of his eye. "You know, I hated you that first night. Thought you were just another rich guy who wanted to feel good about himself." Keanu chuckled, leaning back in the booth. "And now," Mackie snorted, "now I think you're still crazy, but are maybe the good kind." They all laughed, a soft, tired sound that filled the empty restaurant with something bigger than words. It was the sound of people who had been broken in different ways learning how to stand together. Emma said, "People keep asking if we'll start taking reservations again." Mackie nodded. "We'll do it right this time. No more hiding. No more trying to pretend we're fine when we're not." Keanu tapped the table. "We should fix the sign outside too. It's falling apart." Mackie's eyes sparkled. "That sign's been up there since my father's time. Maybe it's time we put a new one up, something that says we're not done yet." Keanu felt Sam's tail thump against his boot, a sleepy reminder that some things were simple and true, like loyalty, kindness, and second chances. Emma tilted her head, a thoughtful look on her face. "We should throw a reopening night. Invite the neighborhood. Tell everyone the story of this place." Mackie raised an eyebrow at Keanu. "What do you think?" Keanu smiled wide. "I think that's the best idea I've heard all week." The next few days were a blur of scrubbing, painting, fixing squeaky doors and leaky pipes. People from the neighborhood showed up with buckets of paint, rolls of vinyl for the windows, new signs they'd made by hand. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore, it was a place stitched together by dozens of hands, old and young, each adding something small that made it feel alive again. When the night of the reopening came, the line wrapped around the block. Families brought flowers. Old regulars brought framed photos from years ago, birthdays, anniversaries, moments that happened under this roof. They taped them to the fresh painted wall like a living scrapbook. Inside, Mackie worked the kitchen, like an old master rediscovering his gift. Emma floated from table to table, welcoming guests like family, and Keanu stayed in the background, filling water glasses, wiping down counters, telling people quietly, "Make sure you come back." Near midnight, when the last plate was scraped clean and the last hugs were given, the three of them stood in the middle of the restaurant. The sign above the door now read Mackie's family table, new paint, same old name, but filled with new hope. Mackie turned to Keanu, voice rough but full of gratitude. "You didn't have to stay, you know." Keanu looked at Emma, at the new photos on the wall, at Sam wagging his tail like he'd been part of this story all along. "Yeah," he said quietly, "but I'm glad I did." Outside, the Chicago streets were still cold, but inside, the warmth glowed like a promise. Not everything was fixed. Not every scar would heal overnight. But some broken things didn't need to be thrown away, they just needed people willing to hold them together. The reopening night at Mackie's family table was just the beginning. Word spread like sunlight on cold streets. There was a little restaurant in Chicago where the food tasted like old memories and new beginnings, a place where you could come in carrying the weight of your day and leave with something lighter in your chest. People didn't come just for the meatloaf or the pies, though they were as good as ever. They came because they knew they'd be seen, heard, and welcomed like family. Keanu could have walked away then. He could have returned to his movie sets and hotel rooms with polished floors and quiet loneliness. But every morning, he found himself drawn back to that small diner on the corner. It wasn't his restaurant. It never would be. But somehow, it felt like home in a way so many glittering places never did. In those days that followed, small things changed everything. The old cracked tiles were replaced, but they left one corner untouched, where kids had scratched their names years ago. Emma brought in fresh flowers every Monday, her shy smile now wide and warm. She even started studying part-time at a local college, hoping one day to open a small cafe of her own. Mackie found his rhythm again. He laughed more, barked less. He added a new dish to the menu, a simple soup he called Keanu's bowl. When someone asked him why, he'd say with a grin, "Because sometimes you just need something warm when the world feels cold." The neighborhood took notice. Local news outlets came and went, but none of them could quite capture what made the place special. Maybe because what really mattered couldn't be filmed. It was in the way people lingered after their meals, sharing stories, in the sound of forks scraping plates, while the old jukebox played soft music in the corner, in the laughter that floated out the door with the winter wind. One Sunday afternoon, when the lunch rush had quieted down, Mackie sat across from Keanu at their usual booth. Sam snored under the table, his belly full of scraps and his tail flicking. In his sleep. "So," Mackie said, stirring sugar into his coffee, "when are you gonna go back to your Hollywood life?" Keanu leaned back, his tired eyes soft but clear. "Soon, I guess. I've got scripts waiting. People expecting things." Mackie frowned. "You've done enough, you know. More than enough." Keanu nodded slowly. It was never about enough. It was about staying, showing up when someone needed you too. He looked around the diner at Emma wiping down a table, at a mother laughing with her son in a corner booth, at the old photos on the walls. "This place, it reminded me what matters." Mackie cleared his throat, his voice catching. "Never thought a bowl of soup and a stranger would save my life." Keanu's laugh was low and warm. "Sometimes that's all it takes." They sat there a while, sipping coffee, the clock ticking on the wall like a heartbeat. Finally, Keanu stood and bent down to ruffle Sam's ears. "Come on, buddy. Time to get back on the road." Emma appeared at his side, holding a small paper bag. "Fresh bread for the road," she said, "and some of Mackie's pie." Keanu took it, the simple gift heavier than any award he'd ever held. "Thank you, Emma, for trusting me." Her eyes glistened. "Thank you for staying." When he stepped outside, the cold wind caught his hair, but he didn't shiver. He turned back to see Mackie and Emma standing in the doorway, waving, the new sign above them glowing warm in the dusk. Mackie's family table. The name fit now. It wasn't just about food, it was about the people who found each other when they needed it most. Keanu walked down the street, Sam trotting at his side, the leash loose in his hand. He didn't know if he'd ever see this place again, but he knew it would always be there, a small light burning steady against the dark. A reminder that kindness didn't need headlines or cameras. It just needed someone willing to show up and stay. He paused at the corner, taking one last look back. Through the window, he saw Mackie laughing at something Emma said, the sound muffled by glass but clear in his mind. For the first time in a long time, Keanu felt no weight on his shoulders, just a quiet, steady warmth in his chest. He leaned down to scratch Sam's head. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "There's always another place that needs a little hope." And with that, they turned into the city lights, the hum of life all around them. One man, one dog, and the promise that as long as you stayed when it mattered, you were never really alone.